Somebody once pressed a piece of sharpened rock against a living person's tooth and started spinning it. Not on a corpse, not in some ritual sense either. A real person sitting there, letting it happen. And apparently, at least a few of them went back for seconds. 9,000 years before anyone invented the dental chair, that happened. In a farming village in what's now Pakistan. We tend to assume ancient people just suffered. Toothache, infection, whatever. Grit your teeth and hope it passes, or hope you die before it gets worse. What we don't usually imagine is someone diagnosing the problem and performing an actual procedure to fix it. That feels too advanced, too deliberate, too much like something that needs centuries of accumulated science behind it. Except the evidence says it happened anyway, and it comes from a place called Mehrgarh. Archaeologists dug up this site back in the 70s and 80s, a massive Neolithic graveyard in Baluchistan, part of what turned out to be one of the earliest farming settlements in South Asia. Wheat, barley, cattle, permanent houses instead of following herds around. Hundreds of skeletons came out of the ground over the years, but nobody clocked what was hiding in the teeth until much later, when researchers ran high-powered imaging on the molars and noticed something off. Small, almost perfectly round holes drilled straight into the biting surface. Could have been anything at first glance. Wear, decay, some kind of damage picked up over 9 millennia in the dirt. Except the holes were too clean for that, too symmetrical. And when they looked inside with better equipment, they found tiny spiral ridges running around the walls, the kind of mark only a spinning tool leaves behind. Something had been rotated against that tooth, repeatedly, on purpose. 11 molars, 9 adults, 4 men, 4 women, one they couldn't determine. 20s to over 40 years old, spread out across roughly 1,500 years of this village's history. So not a fluke, not one weird burial, a practice. Which raises the obvious problem. How do people with no metal, no writing, nothing we'd call medicine, end up drilling into teeth with this kind of precision? Turns out the answer was sitting in the same graves the whole time. Mehrgarh wasn't only a farming village, it was also where people made beads. Shell, turquoise, lapis lazuli, all drilled with tiny exact holes using flint tips on small bow drills. Basically the same setup you'd use to start a fire by friction, just aimed at stone instead. Somebody at some point looked at that tool and thought, this works on rock. What if I tried it somewhere else? Researchers actually tested this, built replica drills, tried them on extracted molars. Took about a minute to punch a hole nearly identical to the ancient ones. A minute doesn't sound long until you imagine holding a spinning stone point against someone's actual tooth for that entire time, with no chair, no numbing agent, nothing to keep the head still except another person's hands. And this wasn't decorative. 4 of the 11 drilled teeth had visible decay right next to the hole, which lines up with what a dentist does today when they drill out a cavity before filling it. There's a reason decay was probably common here too. Grinding wheat and barley on stone introduces tiny abrasive particles into the flour itself. Eat that for years and it wears enamel down, exposes the dentin underneath, and infection risk goes way up. So in a weird way, farming, one of the big human success stories, was quietly destroying people's teeth, and somebody in this particular village found a way to fight back. Here's a detail worth sitting with for a second. None of these 9 people were buried anywhere special. No marked tomb, no elite treatment. Ordinary graves, same as everyone else. Which suggests this wasn't some secret procedure reserved for chiefs or priests. It looks more like a skill that existed in the community and got used when somebody's tooth started failing. Now the part that turns this from a cool fact into something a little unsettling. The practice runs for around 1,500 years at this one site, and then it just stops. Whatever culture came after didn't keep it going. Nobody knows exactly why. Maybe the people who knew how to do it died without teaching anyone. Maybe it stopped feeling worth the risk. Whatever happened, a whole branch of practical medical knowledge, refined over dozens of generations, disappeared. And the gap afterward is honestly the wildest part. The next confirmed case of anything like deliberate dental drilling on a living person doesn't show up again until ancestral Puebloan communities in the American Southwest, around 1100 years ago, and separately in Europe, not until the 1500s. Thousands of years between one small Neolithic village solving this problem and the rest of the world catching up on its own. I want to be honest here too, because it's easy to romanticize this into some tidy little clinic scene. It almost certainly wasn't. No anesthetic, no antiseptic that we know of. Just stone, a steady hand, and someone who had to sit still and cooperate through the whole thing while awake. A few of these people apparently went through it on more than one tooth, which tells you something about how bad the alternative must have been. So zoom out, and this stops being a story about clever ancient dentists, even though they clearly were clever. It becomes a story about how fragile knowledge actually is. A community can figure something out, pass it down for 50 generations, refine it, and still lose the whole thing completely. Not because the idea was bad, just because knowledge only survives as long as somebody's around to carry it forward. For about 15 centuries, the people of Mehrgarh were quietly ahead of almost everyone else on the planet. And then, for reasons buried as deep as the graves themselves, they weren't. So here's my question. If the person next to you held the one skill that could save you from a slow, painful infection, would you actually sit still and let them use it? Let me know down in the comments. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you soon.